Welcome back to the podcast. So, in today's episode, we're going to be going over the best peptides for fat loss. Now, these are completely blowing up. At least on my TikTok feed, I see every other dude talking about them. And then, of course, they got a link in the bio for a discount code. And I do too, just to be transparent. But the point of this podcast is to give you the best peptides for fat loss, but also explain what each one does and how it interacts with our body to achieve said fat loss outcomes. So, first, they go far beyond your usual over the counter fat loss supplements like you could consider caffeine, yohimbine, potentially, and other compounds that kind of just elevate your heart rate, increase thermogenesis. And some will, like caffeine, maybe nicotine, can slightly suppress your appetite as well. And while these do provide a short term, say, increase in energy expenditure, sometimes by around 100 to 200 calories per day, that effect is typically mild and temporary. And over time, as your body adapts, the benefits can fade. But more importantly, the root cause of poor fat metabolism, things like insulin resistance, low mitochondrial function, leptin dysregulation, or high cortisol, aren't addressed. And this is where the conversation begins to shift towards peptides and other non-stimulant based interventions for fat loss. So we now know that fat loss isn't just a calories in versus calories out equation. Yes, absolutely, energy balance matters, but how your body regulates hunger, stores energy, and burns fuel is heavily influenced by hormonal signaling first and cellular signaling pathways. And that's kind of what peptides target. Instead of forcing fat loss through, let's say, stimulant driven thermogenesis or increases in heart rate, these compounds work by modulating biological processes that we're going to get into separately because they each kind of do their own thing, and the peptides that act on these mechanisms. So, for example, one mechanism, mitochondrial biogenesis, which is helping your cells become more efficient at using fat for fuel. Then, of course, appetite signaling, probably the most popular one, reducing cravings by altering GLP-1, leptin, or ghrelin pathways. Then you got growth hormone releasing peptides, encouraging fat mobilization and lipolysis, as well as preserving lean mass. And then you have ones like SLU, that AMPK activation, mimicking the cellular effect of exercise or caloric restriction. So while these aren't quick fixes, definitely want to get out the way. They definitely don't replace bad habits or replace nutrition and training. And you should realistically absolutely have those dialed in first. But from a physiological standpoint, you can think of it as the difference between, let's say, revving the engine harder, say like caffeine would do or other stimulants, or upgrading the engine entirely. So switching from like a shitty engine to a V8. And this is why clinicians, researchers, and even general practitioners are starting to explore these tools, not just for fat loss, but for like metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, and as well as age-related muscle loss. And they will likely be, in my opinion, the future of medicine. I could see a day where they're in people's daily stacks, just like, let's say, creatine is now. So is that day far off? I don't think it is. I think maybe 5-10 years down the line, and that might be a conservative estimate as well. So whether you choose to use them or not, which is not the goal of this podcast at all, understanding how they work versus just watching some fitness influencer, seeing his transformation, and then clicking the link in his bio and buying it. I want to offer you real value because once you understand the underlying biology, you start to see fat loss not just as, say, sticking to a plan, a discipline problem, but also as a systems problem, which sometimes it can be, and one that can often be improved by changing the inputs at the cellular and hormonal level. With that foundation in place, let's look at one of the most promising, in my opinion, coolest areas of peptide research, and that is mitochondrial optimization and how improving energy metabolism at the cellular level can influence fat oxidation as well as body composition. So when we look at peptides like MOTC, SS31, SLU PP332, which actually isn't a peptide, it's a molecule, and even compounds like methylene blue, we're talking about compounds that support mitochondrial health and function. So back to the high school biology class, I remember sitting there listening to all this, but the mitochondria are essentially, the powerhouse of the cell, the energy or the engines of the cells, you could call them. So if you're asking your body to perform, whether that's fat loss, muscle growth, hypertrophy, or just better recovery overall, better utilization of food, creation of ATP, mitochondrial efficiency is a rate limiting factor because say you have inefficient mitochondria, you then force the body into anaerobic metabolism, which yields maybe 1 or 2 molecules of ATP per cycle. But if you're running oxidative phosphorylation efficiently through your mitochondria, you're getting 30 to 35 ATP per cycle, which, I mean, that's a pretty big jump. So it's quite the difference. So that begs the question, what are mitochondrial peptides? Well, they are molecules that either increase the number of mitochondria, being biogenesis, or improve the efficiency of the ones you already have. And their effects do go beyond improving energy because they also influence fat oxidation, recovery, endurance, and even cognition. MOTS, for example, is a mitochondrial derived peptide that activates mitochondrial biogenesis, so it creates more through AMPK and SRT1 pathways, and that means more mitochondria and better performing ones. And its main function is to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis. It essentially tells the body to make more mitochondria. By increasing the number of mitochondria, you increase the body's ability to oxidize fat, produce energy, and regulate glucose more efficiently, among many other things that it's being studied for, which is quite a bit. So MOTS is definitely a cool one. And then you look to something to add on top of that, like SLU-PP332, which has no human data on it, which is very important to note. So if you are going to go ahead and self-experiment, if you choose to use it, that's on you. But say you add it in on top, targeting the estrogen-related receptor alpha, which controls mitochondrial gene expression and oxidative metabolism. So you then be layering in another pathway for improving not just the number, but the efficiency of the mitochondria as well. So you're creating more and more mitochondria essentially, and now you're supercharging. Now, like I said, SLU works on the estrogen related receptor alpha, which is another trigger for mitochondrial biogenesis. And while MOTS operates through mitochondrial DNA, SLU comes at it through the PGC1 alpha and NRF2 pathways, which also handle antioxidant signaling. So not only are you creating more mitochondria, but you're creating cleaner, you could say, more efficient mitochondria with better antioxidant capacity. Then there's methylene blue, which actually has been used since the late 1800s, which is pretty crazy, and is basically a buffer for oxidative stress, and it may even help recycle electrons that would otherwise create reactive oxygen species, and that is key because the more mitochondria you create, the more oxidative stress you potentially generate if you don't have that antioxidant support in place. So it acts on the electron transport chain and helps with electron transfer, reducing oxidative stress and improving ATP production as well. And it also increases mitochondrial respiration and can support cognitive function. And that's what a lot of people notice when taking it. I personally notice a nootropic effect when taking it. And I take 10 milligrams 4 times a week on training days. And that's one of the major benefits I've noticed from taking methylene blue. Been on it for about 3 months now. So now you could potentially stack it with, you could quite beautifully stack it with MOTS and then SLU and have quite the mitochondrial optimization stack. And then there's SS31, which binds to the cardiolipin in the inner mitochondrial membrane, then stabilizes the membrane and protects against oxidative damage. So what I find really cool with the mitochondrial optimization side of things is that if your goal is performance, which if you're listening to the podcast, I assume it is relatively fat loss, yes, but performance overall, your mitochondria are either your limiting factor or they can be your edge. So if you support them, the same inputs, the same amount of calories, the same training volume can potentially yield much more. But there is a caveat. If you're oxidatively stressed, if you're deficient in key micronutrients like magnesium as an example, or if your gut is not on point, telling your body to create more mitochondria could actually backfire because you're basically just throwing more fuel onto a fire. And that is always why I'd prioritize the basics first and make sure the basics are on point. A surplus of micronutrients, antioxidant support, get your circadian rhythm in check, and get your gut health in check as well. Then you can think about layering in mitochondrial support strategically, provided you have the right context to do so. So while these pills are not magic, even though as AI progresses, they will likely get to a day where there is such thing as a magic pill, but they're tools. And then when used correctly in a healthy supported system, they can improve the way your body handles energy. They can vastly improve your recovery and of course your fat loss outcomes. But it takes the right context, just like anything. Next on the list, we have growth hormone secretagogues. Now, when most people hear growth hormone, at least I did when I first researched peptides like 1.5, maybe 2 years ago, they probably think either like of bodybuilders, which is my first thought, or like anti-aging clinics. But what a lot of people don't realize is that growth hormone plays a major role in lipolysis and fat metabolism. And there's a class of peptides designed specifically to stimulate your body's own natural growth hormone production. And these are called growth hormone secretagogues. And the two most commonly used in this category are CJC 1295, and Ipamorelin, which are often stacked together, and they do work synergistically. CJC is a growth hormone releasing hormone analog, which binds to the growth hormone releasing receptor in the pituitary and stimulates the release of growth hormone in pulses, mimicking the natural rhythm your body is already supposed to have. So GH stimulates IGF-1 from the liver, and both of these hormones help mobilize fatty acids. Ipamorelin, on the other hand, is a ghrelin mimetic, so it stimulates the growth hormone secretagogue receptor, leading to pulses of GH release. Same thing, kind of, but just through a different mechanism. So when you combine the two, CJC with ipamorelin, you kind of get a dual stimulus. One works on the growth hormone releasing hormone axis, the other hits the ghrelin pathway, and together they create a pretty strong, sustained, and more natural release of growth hormone. So what are the benefits? Well, increased lipolysis for one, better sleep, faster recovery, skin health potentially, and one of the most important, fat loss with lean mass preservation. So if you're in a deficit and training hard, GH peptides can help mitigate the muscle loss. That can come with aggressive cutting, even though if you set your diet phase up correctly, you really shouldn't lose muscle. But nevertheless, unlike synthetic growth hormone, which will suppress your natural production, even though you can get it back pretty quick, secretagogues preserve that feedback loop. So you're basically just amplifying what the body already does, essentially. Now, I typically dose these before bed, or you could do pre-cardio, and that's when your body naturally releases growth hormone pre-bed, and it allows you to take advantage of the overnight recovery window you'll get, and you'll also notice improved sleep quality as well. Now on to Tesamorelin, a GH-releasing hormone analog, originally developed for lipodystrophy, which is a condition where fat accumulates disproportionately around the organs. And what makes Tesamorelin so interesting is that it's highly selective for visceral fat, so that potentially stubborn intra-abdominal fat, and Tesamorelin stimulates your own GH release as well, but does so a little more aggressively than CJC by ramping up IGF-1. It enhances lipolysis and increases resting energy expenditure, all while preserving lean tissue. And clinical studies show significant reductions in VAT, which is just visceral adipose tissue, without major changes in subcutaneous fat or water retention. So in application, one could use Tesamorelin during a fat loss phase, especially when someone is already on the leaner end, so later in their fat loss phase, and looking to strip off that last bit of stubborn fat. Okay, now let's shift gears into a completely different mechanism, one that's become arguably the most talked about category in fat loss over the past few years in terms of peptides. Ridiculously popular, often used in the wrong context, in my opinion, and that is GLP-1 receptor agonists. So these pretty simply modulate hunger, satiety, and some of them blood sugar regulation as well. GLP-1 stands for glucagon like peptide 1, and that's a hormone your body releases after meals to slow gastric emptying, regulate insulin secretion, and tell your brain basically you're full. So when you take a GLP-1 agonist like semaglutide, otherwise known as Ozempic, or liraglutide or Tirzepatide, you're amplifying that signal. Now, semaglutide is the most well-known, which Ozempic, and it's long-acting, meaning you can dose it once a week and maintain stable levels, and it definitely works. People report huge appetite suppression from it, but it is the first generation of this class, and we now have other GLP-1 agonists like Tirzepatide, which is known as Mounjaro, I believe, which takes a step further by activating both the GLP-1 and the GIP receptors. And GIP is another gut hormone that improves insulin sensitivity and fat metabolism as well. So this dual mechanism tends to produce even more profound weight loss in clinical trials, not just via appetite like semaglutide, Ozempic, but also improved metabolic flexibility. And then there's the newest one, Retatrutide, which is a triple agonist. So it has GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptor activation. And what glucagon does is it raises energy expenditure and promotes fat oxidation. So you're basically getting appetite suppression, insulin regulation, and increased caloric output. So these can be absolutely huge for the right person, and when used intelligently is the big point to kind of hit the nail on the head there, because you can do yourself more harm than good if you don't have your diet on point, and then you go ahead and you ramp the dose up way too high, then you just don't eat and you don't train, and then you lose all your muscle. So you're arguably in a worse position. So other than the obese person, let's talk about the other class of people using these, I guess, the cohort. Let's say you're just you're a common gym goer, or you see these blowing up on TikTok, especially Retatrutide. You should definitely have your diet on point and resistance training on point, because let's say you take one, you suppress your appetite, and you don't have any structure or know-how when it comes to nutrition or training for that matter, you're going to lose muscle. And I think that's arguably make you less healthy. And even if your goal is to fat loss, you're just going to look like a smaller version of yourself. So obviously, depending on how insulin resistant you are and how much body fat you're carrying, it depends the right person. But nevertheless, I'm not here to tell you to use them or not. That's not the point of this podcast. But here is how I would use it intelligently. First, if you have never executed a fat loss phase before, I don't think I don't think you need it by any means, to be honest. Just because you finish your last meal at the end of the day and you're still hungry doesn't mean you got to go eat. So I would say if you're someone who knows exactly how to cut, you've done fat loss phases in the past, and you want to take a little assistance to take some of that food noise away, maybe you're gonna go into a contest prep. Maybe you're going to use it post diet, which I think is an appropriate application when food noise and food focus is at its peak. And you're going to use the minimum effective dose that allows you to get your desired outcome. So say you start Retatrutide, you start 0.25 milligrams 3 times a week, so 0.75 milligrams total weekly, and that allows you to diet without the constant thought of food. You get rid of that food noise, great. Then you don't need to taper up until you notice that dose is no longer giving you that desired outcome. I think the worst thing you could do, which I've seen, is start increasing the dose every week, and especially when there's absolutely no need to do so. But overall, they aren't hacks and will not replace the basics, which, I mean, if you're two of my boys listening to this right now, you know who you are. For some context, these guys have never executed a proper diet phase. They don't know how to follow a meal plan. They don't really know how to follow their structured nutrition. They're definitely not obese. They're 20 years old. You have no business, in my opinion, using GLP-1s, Retatrutide specifically, nor do you need it. But with that said, they are a tool for making your diet easier and can help one regain control over eating behavior, which is a big one. There's also some interesting research that shows on GLP-1s that shows its role in addiction, which is pretty fascinating as well. So in my opinion, not that it matters, to be honest, is that the smart play is to use them either while building habits you'll keep long after, or after you've locked everything in, like structure, food quality, meal timing, resistance training, sleep, lifestyle habits, etc. So that is a wrap on today's podcast. We covered mitochondrial optimization and some peptides there, few GH secretagogues, and then of course the GLP-1s. I appreciate you all for watching. All my links are below, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.